I don't know if you guys heard about like the story about the Grim Reaper. Well, in April 1888 to February 1889, he committed 11 murders, and 5 of those murders were simply the same. But have you ever wondered like what type of technology they used back in the day? Like how would they know like what happened and like what kind of technology, like the technology they would use back in the day, and like how it would be different from now? Well, today I'm here to discuss to you about like the history of criminal technology and how has the technology increased over time and how it's like been a great impact on the technology. And also I'm going to talk about a bit about the crime rates of 2015 compared to from the 1960s to the 1980s. So this man here, his name is Alfonso Bertoni. He's a French criminologist from the 1800s, and he created like this system called the Bertoni system, and it's basically like 11 measurements from like how tall you are, the length of your arm, to the size of your foot, the eye color, hair color, length, and also they will like take a picture of you, like how they call like mug shots now. They would have like those type of like systems back in the day, and the mug shots they would call like back in the day were called portrait parley, and it would be basically like the identification of a suspect and how different it would be from like other suspects. So this is like what they would do back in the day. Like obviously we would do fingerprints now, and they would do like the mug shots over there. But instead of like using like computers, they would like handwritten like all the information about the suspect, which would be like pretty hard back in the day because for them to like send them to like other countries, it would be like more difficult because I have to like mail them and to be able to do that. And like now they can just use a computer and to make it more faster. So these two men here are called the West brothers, and one man here, Will West, he was supposedly committed crime in Kansas, and he kept denying his about what he did, even though he's like saying, "Oh, I didn't do it," but people still kept saying, "Oh, you did it," and everything. So they took the examinations that we have here, and they took his picture, and then later noticing that they had another picture that man looked similar like him, and later figuring out it was his brother William West that committed the crime. So yeah. And well, obviously this is like what they use now, and like the technology from today is obviously way more different, because like this is like what they would use for the mug shots in the 1800s, and now like there's like different technology around the world, like policemen can use drones. So like if there's like a hazardous place and they can't like go there, or they could use like robotic like little robots to like hide into small places where they can like hide and not like being seen. And also this is a gunshot detector. So like they would like put it on top of like this camera here on top of like a lamppost, and then they can like figure out where the gunshot has been shot, or what kind of like gun they would use for the criminals. And the crime rates, the final like thing I'm gonna talk about is like the crime rates from 2015. So like from 1960 to 1980, it was like really like huge increase of crime rates. Like see here, like from 1965 to like 1980 and 1985, like the property crime rate was really high during that time. And PPIC states that 236 to 888 crimes per 100,000 per residence were committed during the 1960s to the 1980s. But in 2015, the Sierra region and the South Coast areas crime rates in 1,798 and 2,085 per 100,000 residents. However, in the San Francisco Bay, the robbery rates are 6 times higher than the Sierras. So, to come to a conclusion, I hope that you guys like learned a bit about the criminal technology and like how the technology has increased over time, and hopefully like over the years, a lot like more technology can help the crime rates and lower them in time. Thank
So Javier, what did you think?
I thought it was an interesting topic with the criminal technology that was changed over the years. I'm going to start with the things that needs improvement on. The word using was a little too much. You have to get out of that habit of using it. She needs a little bit more practice with some of the wording choices that she had. And moving on to the interesting part that I liked was the interesting uses of her information. It could have been more, it was a little bit broader the information that she was putting out, but it could have been better. I like the use of the statistic, made it more believable of what the crime rate was throughout the 1960s through the 80s. And it was interesting learning about the Boltzoni system. And that's it. That's what I have.
Okay. You have a reference early on to the Grim Reaper. I don't know if that's the same case as Jack the Ripper or a different case. So I thought that I was a little bit confused. The idea that there was a serial killer and that there were crimes that were being committed and they were tracking them down and they're using some of these techniques. That seems interesting, but we never hear any of that referred to again in the rest of the presentation. So it's sort of hanging there during the speech, waiting for you to come back to it. There's a preview of what the supporting material is going to be, but it really goes by like I'm going to talk about this, how this, and 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 I don't think that it really is an organizational structure so much as it's just a list of topics, and I think you need to give it a little more coherence. Those topics end up sounding very random in the presentation, and I think that that's problematic. There ought to be a system by which this is being developed. For example, it makes perfect sense that there's really a chronological process to the development of these things. So you have that original system that involves the measurements, and then you have a system that involves photographs and fingerprints, and then you have a system that involves video technology and auditory messages, so that we've got different periods of time through which the technology is getting better. That seems to me like it would have been a stronger way to organize the speech and make it a little more coherent. I often felt like the things that you talked about are interesting subjects, but they lack enough context to explain. Like you talk about the West Brothers crime, and the FBI report that you had there, and the dilemma, the problem that they discovered, and I'm not sure if that's a problem that's discounting this 100-year-old system of measurements that they were talking about, or whether it had to do with the problems with the photography, or whether it had to do with the record keeping and sharing of information, or all of those things. And I don't really know what the crimes were. I think there needs to be kind of a little bit of a story and a context that goes with that. And the same sort of thing happens, like when you talk about gunshot detectors on the lampposts. I'm going, okay, well, are those on every lamppost? Why did they pick particular ones? Is this really designed for gang-infested parts of a city so that they can track something down, or do they expect this to be happening all the time? It just feels a little bit like you've got an interesting piece of information here, and we're not getting a broad enough picture to see why that is important. And that happens in several places in the speech. So I like the individual incidents or events that you're talking about, or technologies that you're talking about. I just feel like any one of them could have been your speech. You could have talked about that whole measurement technique and how well it worked, why it was developed that way, whether it was effective at solving any crimes. Did it become popular 150 years ago after it was developed? Those sorts of things. And I could have listened to a speech just on that and felt like I was getting a little bit better informed. But instead, you're kind of changing. And I think the evolution of the technology is an interesting way to go too. But you have to give it, like I said, a little bit more context, and there has to be a smoothness to the way that information is being presented. You do, speaking of presentation, you do sound a little hesitant sometimes, a little uncertain as to where you're going. I was thinking that you were going to call the one system. I can't remember the guy's name either. Of course, I only heard it the one time. The portal system, or the portal parley, or whatever the portage parley. It was like, I wasn't quite sure what it was, but like I said, I was wondering, how did that get developed, and how is it being used, and it just feels like you were uncertain about what you were going to say. It sounded like you were going to call it something else, that you had another term for it, and you kind of just defaulted to the guy's name. So there was something a little bit odd about that. And I think that's a practice thing also. All right, thank you.